Hey, it's Antoine with the Conviction Fiction Podcast, and I want to talk about some unspoken truths or unspoken rules. Your entire world is built on a foundation of lies, not malicious lies, but invisible agreements and unspoken rules that profoundly impact your freedom, your choices, and your perception of reality. From the moment you step out your door, you're navigating a complex web of social contracts. Understanding them isn't just about avoiding awkward moments or fitting in. It's about reclaiming agency in a world governed by rules that were never written down, yet enforced with brutal consistency. And if you've ever been incarcerated or lived on the margins, you already know this truth better than most, because some people learn these rules gradually, others not so gradually, kind of on on the spot, right? So once that comes into play, I want to let you know that even though you learn them the hard way, we can break it all down. Welcome to the Conviction Fiction. Welcome back to the Conviction Fiction. I'm your host, Antoine Rivers, and today we're going to talk about the power of unspoken rule. There's a moment we've all experienced, even if we didn't have language for it at the time. You say something that lands wrong, or you stand in the wrong place, you move out of sequence, and all of a sudden the air shifts. Nobody explains it to you, but you feel it. The silence gets even heavier and your eyes start to linger a second too long. That moment is your introduction to a social contract. A social contract is like an invisible agreement, unspoken understanding about how we're supposed to behave, who belongs, and what's acceptable. And that's in any given space. There's no paperwork, no orientation session, no warning labels yet. These agreements shape nearly every interaction we have. Think about how many rules you follow every day that were never written down. Holding the door for someone behind you. We all do that, right? Waiting your turn without being told to wait your turn. Or getting in line at your favorite fast food restaurant. Maybe even lowering your voice when you walk into certain spaces. Sometimes we just make eye contact just long enough, but not too long. These are invisible handshakes, signals that say, I understand the rules here, I belong. And when those handshakes are missed, the response isn't always loud, but it's so decisive. Incarceration strips the illusion away completely. Inside, social contracts are survival mechanisms where you sit, who you acknowledge, how you walk, when you speak. None of it is accidental. Break the wrong unspoken rule and the consequences aren't awkward. They're immediate, physical, and sometimes violent. Nobody explains the rules because explanation itself can be seen as weakness. You learn by watching, right? Unless you find you an OG or somebody that kind of hip you to the rule. You learn by feeling tension before it turns violent. You also learn because you have to learn. What's uncomfortable is realizing how similar the free world actually is. Now, it's similar out here, but with the actual ways that we had to learn about those invisible handshakes and social contracts. We like to pretend society runs on laws alone. Well, it doesn't. Laws are the visible structure. Social contracts are the real enforcement. They often determine who gets grace and who gets labor, who gets the benefit of the doubt and who gets watched more closely. Even who's forgiven for mistakes and who's defined by them forever. Now, when you violate a written law, there's at least a process, right? When you violate a social contract, though, there's often no explanation at all. Just distance, just exclusion, just closed doors that no one admits were ever opened in the first place. That's the power of the invisible handshake. It decides belonging long before credentials, intentions, or character ever enter the conversation. And the most dangerous part is that most people don't even realize they're enforcing those laws or those rules. Now, we had to learn the unspoken language while we were incarcerated. Many of us, or even if you are just as impacted, you're a family member of somebody incarcerated, right? You play along with the unspoken rules. Also, think about it on the visitation yard, right? Know who not to talk to, who to talk to. You know not to maintain eye contact too long, especially if your loved one up there. No, nobody ever formally teaches us social contract. There's no class, no handbook, no onboarding process to society. We learn them the same way we learn how to touch a hot stove, through feedback. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's sharp. As kids, we watch how adults behave and mimic what seems to work. Now, as adults, we correct each other through looks, tone, distance, or exclusion. Say the wrong thing in the wrong room and you don't get a warning, bro. You get a shift in energy. That shift is the lesson. Now, going back to incarceration in prison, the learning process is accelerated and oftentimes unforgiving. Like observation becomes currency. You study patterns because guessing wrong can cost you your life. You learn when to speak, when silence is protection, and when neutrality is the most powerful position in the world. Not even in. Every misstep teaches you something, sometimes brutally, but it teaches you nonetheless. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. Coming home doesn't mean the lesson stopped. It means the rules have changed again. I can remember my first stretch back in professional spaces after I got out, meetings, conversations, everyday interactions with that most people take for granted. I came in thinking like honesty, directness, and accountability were assets because inside those qualities kept you alive. If you said something, you meant it. If you didn't, you stayed quiet. But out here, the feedback was a little bit different from what I was used to. I noticed people stiffen when I spoke plainly and just being honest, brutally honest. I noticed people, I was like, "Oh, did he say that?" I watched the expressions change when I held eye contact too long. You can almost feel like the whole room just pulls back. Not because I was wrong, but because I was operating under a different unspoken language. No one corrected me directly, right? Nobody said, "Hey man, blah, blah, blah." No one said, "Hey, here's how this space works." Instead, the lessons came through silence, through being talked around instead of talked to, like opportunities that started to disappear. That's when it hit me. Reentry isn't about employment, housing, or compliance most times. It's about relearning a social language that was never explicitly taught and forgiving yourself when you don't speak it fluently right away. The free world assumes everyone learned the same rules, like you don't say certain stuff or you don't call out people. That's one of the biggest things I learned. Like out here, you can't just call out nobody, even though you might be right, but in the wrong environment, it's like, But when we're in prison, we took pride in calling out like, "Hey, this the truth. I'm standing on it. That's what it is." Out here, nah, it ain't like that. That assumption is false. And for returning citizens like myself, it's dangerous because when you violate a social contract out here, people don't see it as a misunderstanding. They see it as a character flaw. Understanding this doesn't mean abandoning who you are. It just means recognizing that every space has its own dialect and learning when to translate, when to code switch, and when to stand firm, that's a skill. That awareness, that's not weakness. That's wisdom earned the hard way. And you're getting it right here today on the Conviction Fiction Podcast. Please be sure to go check out the website, convictionfictionpodcast.com. Get you some merch. You got sweaters like the one I got on here, a little hoodie. You got other t-shirts with messages that not only have the message, but it's fashionable, right? It's fashionable to wear who you are. Now, there is power in the unwritten rules, right? There's some power there. Social contracts don't just shape individual interactions. They quietly hold entire systems together. They are the glue between strangers, the reason cooperation is possible in a world where most people don't know each other's names. Long before laws step in, social contracts do the heavy lifting. Think about trust. You walk into a store, assuming the price on the shelf is the price at the register. Now, you also can stop at a red light, trusting that the cross traffic will do the same for you. You can speak honestly in certain rooms, believing it won't be used against you later. None of that is guaranteed by law. It's guaranteed by shared expectation. Those unwritten agreements that say, this is how we do things, right? When those agreements hold, society feels stable. Now, when they fracture, everything feels unpredictable. We see this clearly online. For real, digital spaces have weakened or erased many traditional social contracts. Just anonymity removes like a whole accountability. Tone gets flattened just by, typing, tweeting, or texting. Empathy becomes optional. Now, without shared expectations, behavior escalates. Got trolling just everywhere. We get trolled on here. Disrespect becomes normalized. Conversations turn into battlegrounds because the unwritten rules that once restrained us no longer apply or were never renegotiated. Now, the same thing happens offline too. And when those communities lose trust in institutions like court, schools, lawyers, it's not always because the laws changed. It's because the social contracts underneath them were violated. People, and I don't like getting on my soapbox a lot, but people stop believing the system will treat them fairly. Cooperation breaks down and the whole survival logic replaces collective responsibility. Now, for returning citizens, I know you know what I'm talking about because this imbalance is familiar. You are told that, if you follow the rules, you'll be fine. But what's often left unsaid is that written rules are only half the equation. The unwritten ones determine who gets second chance, who gets grace, and who gets permanently defined by their past. This is why two people can commit the same mistake and experience wildly different outcomes. One gets understanding. The other gets judged. One gets corrected. The other one, man, get out of here. You just discarded. The difference isn't the rule. It's the relationship to the social contract. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago on another episode wherein money has come so far into play when it comes to cash bail. You can have two people do the same crime. One person gets to go to jail. The other person gets to stay home because of money. And that's part of the law. But we're talking about those unwritten rules. Those unwritten rules that are inconsistently enforced or selectively applied. This results in not just unfairness, it also results into instability. People start to disengage when things aren't fair. Communities start to fall apart, and It's just, the attitudes are different. Now, understanding the power of the unwritten doesn't make you cynical. It makes you clear. Very much clear in your mind, because it reveals why doing something right sometimes isn't enough, and why change requires more than just policy. It requires like renegotiating the social agreements we pretend don't exist. Some of the social agreements that we have in a lot of neighborhoods across America, especially in the city. See a crime, you don't say nothing. See a crime, you don't say. You see somebody get violated or worse, and you just don't say nothing. It's none of your business. Okay? Now, we can talk about that on another show, but because when I will harp on this for just a little quick second, I had to jump on here. When the unwritten rules go unexamined, they don't disappear. They just keep deciding outcomes. Think about that. Going back to those unwritten rules that we have in a lot of communities across the nation, across your city, across my city. Those unwritten rules, if they're not renegotiated, they just keep deciding the outcomes in silence. So if your community is, rampant gang violence, rampant with drugs, blah, blah, blah. But what are we doing in order to change the narrative? What are we doing? Now, there's a gray area come to this, because I'm strictly about learning and understanding, because here's where social contracts get messy. Not because they are inherently messy. All agreements they don't age gracefully. Not all agreements age gracefully, right? Some collide, some contradict each other, and some get rewritten faster than people can keep up. For instance, nowhere is this more obvious than in technology. For many returning citizens, reentry isn't just stepping back into society, it's stepping back into a new version of society, one that runs on apps, algorithms, portals, passwords, QR codes, AI, and all kinds of other digital expectations no one warned you about. Now, the rules didn't just change, the entire playing field changed. There's an unspoken assumption that everyone understands how to navigate digital spaces, like just naturally. But you don't know how to use that app. You never heard of this? That assumption is wrong and costly. Miss an email because you didn't know it mattered. If you fail to respond fast enough to a message sent at midnight, that could be a problem. Say something online the way you would say it in person. That's not going to work. That's a social contract violation now. That's what that is. Technology introduced new unwritten rules. Responsiveness equals professionalism. Visibility, that means you're engaged. If you are quiet, that means you're not interested, right? You're showing disinterest if you're silent. Go to any Microsoft Teams meeting, Zoom meeting, you just sit there and don't say nothing. That means you're not interested. None of this is written down, yet it determines access to jobs, housing, support services, and social belonging. And we ain't even talked about AI yet. We're interacting with systems that learn from us while we're still learning how to interact with each other, right? What's appropriate to ask? How much should we trust automated decisions? And at the end of the day, who's accountable when technology enforces bias under the guise of neutrality? These aren't technical questions. They are social contract questions, because online communities operate the same way. Each platform has its own culture, tone, and invisible boundary. What's acceptable in one space gets you banned or buried in another. The rules exist, but the real enforcement lives in unwritten forms that sometimes shift all the time. That always shift. Now, for someone rebuilding your life, I got to bring it all the way back. If someone is rebuilding your life, this creates a double burden. You are expected to adapt quickly, flawlessly, and quietly, while also proving that you're trustworthy in systems that were never designed with your learning curve in mind. Not saying it wasn't designed for you, but your learning curve. You're relearning a lot of this stuff. This is that gray area, the space where old survival rules no longer apply and new ones haven't been clearly defined yet. Where authenticity is praised in theory. Yeah, we want you to be authentic, but punished when you're actually doing it. Okay. Mistakes, they're framed as incompetence rather than transition. If you make a mistake, you just don't know what you're doing. Not that you are learning on the fly. Okay. Now, navigating this requires more than compliance. It requires more than a podcast. It requires discernment. You don't have to master every new contract immediately, but you do have to recognize when one is being enforced. Awareness gives you options. Strategy will protect you because the goal isn't to disappear into a system. It's to move through it consciously without losing yourself in the process. Now, to reclaim your reality, I think it's practical to understand the social contract. Knowing that it's not about learning how to behave better so you can be accepted. It's basically about being able to see the system clearly enough to stop blaming yourself for rules you never agreed to and never fully understood. I think once you recognize that much of life is governed by unwritten agreements, something in your mind shifts. The confusion starts to fade and that self-doubt, it starts to loosen. You realize that many of the moments you thought were personal failures were actually mismatches between expectations and access to information, right? That awareness gives you power because now you get to choose. You can decide when a social contract is worth honoring and when it's worth challenging. You can recognize when compliance keeps you safe and when it keeps you small. You can learn to adapt strategically without erasing who you are. That's not rebellion. That's wisdom. For people impacted by incarceration, this matters deeply. Too often, reentry is framed as just get out and follow the rules. But nobody talks about the invisible ones, the expectations about tone. I get that a lot. I hear what you're saying, and it makes sense. It makes perfect logical sense, but your tone, your pace, how much of your story is appropriate to share? Those contracts shape outcomes just as much as background checks or parole conditions. If I'm in a meeting with, I don't know, a business partner or whatever, should I bring up? Yeah, back in 2013, I seen somebody get stabbed for that same shit. For lying, so to speak. Like we're in a professional meeting, so it's like, well, they didn't tell the exact truth. Like, yeah, that shit can get you fucked up. I've seen people get fucked up for lying, for stealing, for being disrespectful. That's an unwritten rule that I have to follow. I can't go on no meeting. Now, the conviction fiction exists to expose that reality, to say out loud that what too many people are forced to learn in silence. When you decode the system, you stop internalizing the shame that you have for wherever you've been. You stop mistaking exclusion for personal failure, and you begin moving into intention instead of reaction. And that's where real change happens, not just individually, but collectively. If we want a different outcome for returning citizens, we just need better policies. We don't just need policy change. Excuse me. I want to go back on that one. If we want a different outcome, for people like me, for people like you, or the people that we care about, returning citizens. We don't just need better policies. We don't need better policies. Not just alone. We need better awareness. We need spaces where people can experience how these systems operate, how the rules shift, and how easily people fall through the cracks when the contracts aren't clear or fair. That's why I want to leave you with a call to action. On April 4th, support the pod movement at the Power Conference during Atlanta's reentry simulation at PICS awareness event at City Hall. Now, this isn't theory. It's lived experience brought into the open. It's an opportunity to witness, understand, and engage with the realities so many navigate every day. Check my socials for the time and details. Matter of fact, you probably see it on the screen right now if you're watching this on YouTube. But it's an event that's going to change lives, change the narrative. I was talking to someone last night. I went to the basketball game here in Atlanta. KD was in town. Never thought I'd get to see that. I saw him a lot when I was locked up. He was playing for Oklahoma City. Didn't get him to see him when he was in Brooklyn, but I was able to witness greatness, you know, because you never know when he's going to retire. Been able to see a couple of players that I kind of idolized and looked at and I'm like, hey, that boy balling. See him live and in person, that's a different thing. But anyway, I ran into a justice impacted individual last night, and he hadn't been out too long. We had chopped it up before. He hadn't been out too long, and he basically told me that he had damn near caught another charge. Ain't been out 4-5 months, but was in like 10. I think he told me 10 years, but was out in society 4 or 5 months. He already on violated somehow, and it was tough. It was tough hearing him because it wasn't tough hearing what he had to say. But I think what was more I think hurtful for me was he was still in survival mode. Even as we sat there and talked, he was still, you know, almost defensive. Like he admitted, he was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. I'm used to things going that way. Dude said something crazy to me. I took immediate offense. Let's go take care of it. And I'm like, bro, like, how did it get to that point? How did it escalate to that point where physical violence or whatever you had going on, conversation shifted there? He admitted that, you know, being in the wrong circles, being around the wrong, all that normal stuff that we talk about all the time on the podcast. But at any rate, I guess what I'm saying is reclaiming your reality and the reality that's out here now. It doesn't happen alone. It happens when awareness turns into action, and when those invisible rules are finally brought into the light. That's how narratives change. That's how systems shift. That's how the work beyond the bars, the work beyond fear. That's how that happens. And, you know, I just believe that there was a time in my life when I thought freedom meant the absence of bars. I didn't understand then that the hardest part of coming home isn't walking out. The hardest part of coming home is learning how to live in a world full of rules nobody explains, those expectations nobody names, and judgments that nobody admits that they're making about me or my history or my life. I've watched people do everything right and still get shut out. I've tried to do everything right and still get shut out. I felt rooms go quiet when I spoke honestly. Now, I've learned sometimes the hard way that survival skills don't always translate into acceptance. And for a long time, I thought that meant something was wrong with me. But nothing was wrong with me. What was wrong was the silence around the rules. This podcast exists because too many people internalize shame for systems they were never taught how to navigate. Because too many returning citizens believe their struggle is a personal failure instead of recognizing it as it's a collision with invisible contracts that were never ever explained. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt out of place, misunderstood, or exhausted from trying to decode a world that keeps moving the goalposts, hear me clearly. You're not broken. You're learning. And learning doesn't happen quietly. It happens through friction. That moment you start seeing the system instead of blaming yourself, that's when everything is going to change. You'll stop reacting. You'll start choosing. You'll begin moving with intention instead of fear. And that's what drives a lot of the trauma-induced decision-making that is fear. Okay? Go check out the book. It's on Amazon. You can also get it at the convictionfictionpodcast.com. It's called Turning Forward to Work Beyond Fear. Because what I've experienced in my life and through classes and talking to people and lecturing and just being a student myself, fear drives most decision making, especially when it comes to the returning citizen. That's not just growth, guys. That's freedom. So wherever you are, inside, freshly home, years removed, or standing beside someone you love who's trying to rebuild, know this: story isn't over. The rules don't get to define you, and the narrative doesn't belong to the system. It belongs to you. That's the work. That's the work right there, guys. Beyond the bars, beyond the labels, beyond the silence, beyond the fear. Tune in later to the Conviction Fiction as we continue to break down this reentry path.